Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Architecture Alumni Talk series. My name is Professor Cameron Brune. I'm the Dean and Head of School in the University of Queensland School of Architecture. Before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which many of us are meeting today. I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Rachel Barnard. Young New Yorkers, YNY, was established by artist and designer Rachel Barnard in 2012. It has a mission to use art to transform the criminal legal system through the creative voices of young New Yorkers. Since the organisation was established, over 1,500 young people aged between 16 and 25 have been sentenced by New York state courts to make art in YNY programs rather than be sentenced to serve jail time or other adult sanctions. Young adults sentenced to YNI use art to become advocates for themselves and for criminal legal reform. Each program culminates in a participant-led public art project that addresses a criminal legal issue of their choice, to which participants invite the very criminal legal professionals involved in their sentencing. This humanises the culture of the courtrooms, the professional members of which possess discretionary power over each young person's case outcome. Rachel is a social practice artist formerly trained as an architect and a graduate of our school in 2004. She is the New York City Public Artist in Residence with the Department of Probation, a fellow at A Blade of Grass, and a 2019 recipient of the League Prize. She holds a Master of Science in Advanced Architectural Design from Columbia University and a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Queensland with honours. It's my great pleasure to introduce alumnus and our friend Rachel Barnard. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's the evening here, but I spent some time with UQ students in December and I loved it. So thank you so much for having me back. So I think what I'm going to do is just dive straight into a presentation by sharing my screen. And I'll probably speak for about 30 minutes and then I hope you all ask me some great questions at the end that challenge me, as well as have us all be thoughtful. So if you think of anything as you go along, please, please, please put it in the chat. I've heard everything that I'm about to say before. So I'd love to hear your thoughts at the end. So I'm the founder of Young New Yorkers, as Cameron beautifully introduced. And this talk is titled Transformative Justice. And what I like to do is ask people to really think, what do they think about when they hear the term transformative justice? Is it transforming young people's lives? Is it transforming their experiences with the system? Or is it transforming the criminal legal system itself? And, you know, I'm based in New York City, and the criminal legal system, of course, is different to what it is in Queensland, but I believe that Queensland also prosecutes 17-year-olds automatically as though they were adults. So our mission at Young New Yorkers is to transform the criminal legal system by the creative voices of young New Yorkers. And so as much as we are committed to providing pathways out of the system without collateral consequences of an adult record for our young people, we're equally committed to giving them a chance to speak back to that system and create reform and transformations within the working cultures of that system. And the context for all of this in the States is the impact of 30, probably closer to 40 years of tough on crime political rhetoric, which has led to the current era of mass incarceration. And mass incarceration is so expansive and so devastating to Black and Latinx communities in the US. It touches almost everybody. And so I'm just going to offer 3 simple ways that we perceive mass incarceration at Young New Yorkers. So the first thing is that this tough on crime political rhetoric has really criminalized young people. So instead of restorative approaches that focused on giving young people a chance to grow and learn from their mistakes, perhaps meeting their needs that aren't met, that led to them making a choice, that led to them being arrested, what we saw is young people being arrested for very normal adolescent behavior. In New York, thousands of kids have been arrested for jumping the turnstile, having a very small amount of marijuana on them. They're handcuffed, they're held in an adult cell for up to 48 hours, and then they can stay inside the criminal legal system for years, for a year or even longer, which interrupts their schooling and is just traumatizing because they lose agency. I live in Brooklyn. So you'll hear Brooklyn every now and again outside my window. You lose, when you're arrested, you lose all agency over your body and your time and your well-being. And so that's extremely traumatizing when you're 16, 17, 18, you're still developing. It's extremely harmful. There are gross, devastating racial disparities in how young people are impacted. For example, if we just look at 16 and 17-year-olds before Raise the Age, which was recent legislation to bring the age of adult responsibility from 16 to 18 here in New York State, 33% of these teenagers are Black or Latinx, and yet account for 95% of the young people who we choose to incarcerate. And when you do this work on a daily basis and you meet the young people and you see how wise and extraordinary they are, you realize it is a violent break in the public imagination of who gets to be young in New York and who doesn't, who gets to learn from their mistakes and who doesn't. Then there's just the administrative side of it, which one of my favorite judges, Judge Grasso, we started this work, a special project together in 2013. He calls it the churn, which is hundreds of kids move in and out of your courtroom. They need to stand beside their lawyer in front of the judge. They say nothing because it could harm the record. The prosecutor and the defense attorney negotiate a plea deal in many cases before it even goes to trial. And oftentimes you're so bewildered, you don't know what's going on. The language is very formal and complicated, and you don't find out what's going to happen with your life until you're whispering in the corridor outside with your lawyer. So the first principle at Young New Yorkers is art, not jail. And that is, we provide a true alternative to incarceration or other adult sanctions, such as community service. And the curriculum is very restorative and leadership based. The second thing is dismissed and sealed. So there's all of these hidden consequences of being arrested and being court involved. And one of them is that you can be saddled with a lifelong criminal record at as young as 16, which really narrows your opportunities for employment, access to social services, scholarships for education. And usually you're coming from a neighborhood that has many people living below the poverty line, and you need access to these things more than other individuals would. And it also just further diminishes the social capital of those neighborhoods. Art advocacy. So this is when we move out of focusing on the young people themselves, and we allow them to bring their artwork back into the courtroom and advocate for themselves and advocate for criminal legal reform as they see it. This is an exhibition we had at the end of one 8-week program that was about police brutality. And we'll look at that a little bit more down the track. And then there's the distinction that we have, which we call transformative justice. And, you know, when you bring criminal legal actors and professionals that are so used to holding power over so many young people's cases, and the young people together in an environment that's more unifying, that has less power imbalances. It humanizes the culture of those courtrooms, and it humanizes the culture of those criminal legal spaces that we operate in. And at every single point that you may have contact with the criminal legal system, there is this thing called discretion. And that means individuals are deciding whether to arrest you or not, whether to sentence you to jail or a program, to dismiss and seal your case, or to give you a lifelong criminal record. And we work heavily with those individuals so that they might know our young people and shift the way that they've been making choices under the culture of mass incarceration for almost 40 years. So as an artist and designer, how the heck, this is a very American slide, did I become the executive director of a criminal legal organization? And I was very fortunate in 2011 to win the Goodman Prize from Columbia University's Architecture School. And it was just to be a public art project to give a platform to teenagers being prosecuted as adults, given at the time that they were automatically held as adults, often to devastating consequences, lifelong consequences. And then in 2012, Chief Judge Lippman announced he was going to raise the age, and a couple of defense attorneys snuck me into court, and I pitched our idea to a judge, told him we had funding from Columbia University, even though it was from the architecture school. I'm sure he thought it was from the law school or the social work school. And he court mandated our program on the spot, and we became the first arts-based diversion program in New York. And we developed this program and this model in collaboration with a lot of people, people with lived experiences, teaching artists, credible messengers, social workers, lawyers, artists, and designers. And that phase went on for almost 10 months and was critical for the early success of our work, and that it was aligned as much as possible with the most progressive movements inside the criminal legal system. So this is our one-day program. This is a collage that Octavius made inside that program, where he talks about growing in ways that you just can't inside of a jail cell when you're worried about your safety. And I won't go into this because I think it'll be a bit boring. And also I'm very particular about our curriculum, and I won't be able to help myself but go into really granular detail. There's so many moments and distinctions and points that make up an empowered and powerful program. But at the end of our first 8-week program, we delivered on the original public art promise of the proposal for young New Yorkers, and we held an exhibition. We invited all the probation officers, the judges, the lawyers, the prosecutors, they all attended. And Sachin's proposal was to have everyone write their dreams on paper aeroplanes and meet on the Brooklyn Bridge once a year and fly them off in a colourful display. And he went up to all these criminal legal actors and had them write their dreams, and at the end we flew them off. And this, combined with their very wise and deep and meaningful insights about the world, about life, and about the criminal legal system and how it needs to change, moved some of these prosecutors who at that time tended to sentence very punitively to tears. And we had this unique experience where both the defense attorneys and the prosecutors were asking us to continue. And so we became Young New Yorkers, the organization and the program. So I'm going to zip through. I'm a little bit worried about the time because I can be, oh, we've got so much time. I'm going to zip through some examples of the exhibitions that we do at the end of the program, just to show you how they can be transformative and really create meaningful change in the working cultures of the courtroom and other criminal legal spaces. So this one was developed by a group of young women. It was called the Wisdom Gift Exchange. And you'll see that their self-portraits line the aisle of the courtroom benches. And this is always an important part of our exhibitions, where the young people get to self-represent who they are beyond their rap sheet and beyond their charges. And the artwork provides an intimate window into who they are and what their aspirations are, without putting any language onto the record that could harm the outcome of their case. And what they did here is they hung a silver gift box, which was just silver curtains, from about 200 helium balloons, because of course this is in the Eastern District Court, we can't attach anything to the walls. And people, and people, when people entered the Wisdom Gift Exchange box, the young people asked them to write down a mistake that they had made in their own life, what they learnt from that mistake, and what wisdom they would have to offer other people. Because this group of young women were really concerned that some people got to learn from their mistakes, and why don't we get to learn from ours? Why are some people have permission to be young while we don't? And then they were certified at the judges' bench with photographs of their wisdom that they would then wrap up in a gift box. And then at the end, as you exited, you deposited your wisdom gift on this silver tray, and you took some a random stranger's wisdom. And, you know, it was just a move that the young people made to have adults who had a lot of power and judgment over the mistakes that they'd made consider some of the mistakes they themselves had made and the chances that they'd had to grow from those mistakes. This is another exhibition by a group of young men called Unity, Visions for Neighbourhood Policing. A lot of young men groups or male identifying groups are really concerned with policing in New York City and police brutality. A lot of times we spend a long time on the arrest and their other interactions they've had historically with the police. And, you know, what they did, you can probably see here, is that as people entered the exhibition, they invited them to write down what their vision for policing would be. And at the time, there was this big push for neighbourhood policing, what their vision would be. And then they would move across, you know, the larger exhibition where the artworks produced during the program are displayed. And then they would tie it to this Unity wall. And the young people were really insistent, this group of young men, that there needed to be a sense of trust and unity and an end to division between police and the communities they served. And they had a very elaborate reconciliation plan to acknowledge past harm and to create meaningful reform and you know, defunding of the police and things like that. And in exchange, the young people would give the participants a rose. And so this is Judge Gabay, and this is the head prosecutor at the time in the youth court part, receiving their rose from the people that they'd sentenced to young New Yorkers. And of course, some neighbourhood police officers attended, and they had some fairly intense conversations between themselves and the young people. And that was not, you know, necessarily easy, but everyone there was open for the courageous dialogue, and it meant a lot to the police officers that the young people had invited them, and it meant a lot to the young people that they had showed up. You can see their holsters with the roses the young people had given them, which I just think is so funny. The young people asked them to not bring their guns, but they declined. And then this is another exhibition. We have 4 of these at least a year, and they always address a different issue that the young people feel is important. And this one was about neurological development. You know, when does the brain science say that you're fully developed as an adult and have consequential thinking? And it was called the Courtroom Spectacular. Here you entered and you answered this quiz. You know, how old are you when you're treated like an adult? At the time it was 16. How long does your record last, and what kind of impact do you think that would have on your life? And you had to kind of declare what kind of brain you had. So criminal legal professionals went around, you know, with an adult brain, or in some cases with the more senior judges as having a senior brain, which made everyone self-conscious of their age. But it also just brought to the forefront that people have different thinking patterns at different stages, and it's up to all of us to support those stages and be generous as a community in the allowances we make. This is the head judge of the Eastern District Court working with Hectavius over her quiz, which was wonderful. And then this is someone getting a reward from the participant helping them with their quiz. After that, behind the proper exhibition, there's an opportunity for you to write down your visions for the future, which is a common step in these exhibitions, but also to read the experiences the young people had written down in an exercise of being arrested and being in the courtroom process, which is very sobering for a lot of criminal legal actors, because it becomes so normal to go to work every day and you don't realize how traumatizing your work environment can be for the other people that are being moved through it. And then half of this class happened to want to grow up to be tattoo artists, so they turned the judges' bench into a tattoo parlor, which I thought was amazing. And using eyeliner and sparkles, they tattooed all the criminal legal partners, which was fantastic. Here's Judge Gabay and Judge Calabrese receiving their brain flowers as an acknowledgement on the way out. So generosity and destabilizing the interactions inside a courtroom and having the young people lead each step instead of them being called into the formal processes of the courtroom. You know, the young people standing at the judge's bench rather than the criminal legal actors. All of this is by design to shift the spatial power dynamics of the courtroom and open up a space for new kinds of interactions inside that system. And how did I go for time? I went too fast. That's the kind of completion of this talk, but I hope there are some questions.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
There's no questions in the box yet, but we'll kick things off, shall we?
Okay.
I want to pick on something you spoke about there just at the very end, which is about the politics of space. And I want to dig a little bit more about the relationship with what you do now and your training in architecture, both here and in the States. But just as a way into that, can you talk to us a little bit about how you use architecture or the shaping of space to facilitate some of these interactions which are about destabilizing the politics of power in space?
Yes. I actually don't think I can say it better than that, Cameron. Destabilizing the politics of power inside space. I think in my, I approach this project as an architect, as a designer, and as an artist. And I think there's several ways which that's influenced the work. The first and the most simplest, but amazingly powerful is that the criminal legal system is a culture that is emphasizes the philosophy of truth. And so it's often the facade or the illusion of truth that this system brings up. And so you have, apologies, it's always Brooklyn making those siren noises. You have, people that are, righteous and justified. And what this work does is it brings an artist designer orientation. And I think it pours beauty into the system, is disarming and destabilizing. And because it's not a discourse or a dialogue in opposition to your discourse, which is how most of the system is set up to be very adversarial, and because it instead uses beauty to create a new space that you can engage in with a very different dynamic, and therefore a very different power structures between the members of the system. It's radically different walking into a courtroom that's a Young New Yorkers exhibition and a courtroom for your court date. And we emphasize that, I guess this is the second way, through a design art thinking practice where the aesthetic of our exhibitions are purposefully sparkly, tacky, overwhelming, because the social visual cues are that of, a cheesy bar mitzvah or a god-awful 6-year-old's birthday, but it's being created as an immersive environment that leads you through an experience and a series of interactions that has you be very joyful and playful at the end, but also might have you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, oh my gosh, look at what we've been doing to these young people. And the third thing is we look at the existing architecture of the courtroom, if we focus on the courtroom exhibitions, and we just do some very purposeful oppositional spatial moves, or rather than oppositional, I would say transformational. So a judge at our exhibitions is never allowed to approach the bench, let alone stand or sit at the bench. In general, only the young people do that. They give their speech, what they've learned, what they want to say back to the system from the judge's bench. Well, the judges and the prosecutors are standing where they stood when their case was first being heard in their arraignment. And so those are three very simple techniques we do. And of course, probably I could write an essay about design thinking and how it's influenced this organization, and I could be more thoughtful about it. But those simple moves are incredibly powerful.
I'll come back to the rest of my questions in a minute because there's some already in the box. There's a question from Carly Marnane who says, thank you very much, Rachel. I was wondering what your vision would be for the outcome of your program, and if you could speak specifically about how the architecture might represent that vision. I think what she's asking is what's Young New Yorkers version 2 if it does bring about a profound change? Carly, I hope I'm paraphrasing your question correctly. If Young New Yorkers is a prototype for a changed physical environment in the courtroom, what would that look like?
Great. First and foremost, Young New Yorkers tries to be a new space for justice that is truly just. And we want every young person to walk into our classrooms and have an experience of their personal greatness. It's hard to imagine how that is so consistently robbed of these young people as they move through the system. They're handcuffed, they're called names, they're fingerprinted, they're a defendant, some people call them a criminal. There's a stigma when they return to their neighborhoods that they're burdened with. And the first thing we do at Young New Yorkers is we sit in a circle, and while everyone's awkwardly waiting for the program to start, maybe a bit arrogant, maybe a bit scared, we just have them write down what their strengths are. And we very clearly say, we're going to get to know you and why you're awesome before we talk about that choice you made, because we know that choice is very complicated. And it's also not who you are, and your case is not who you are. And in the longer programs, you know, we write down words, and I'm going to tie this to an answer soon because I can see I'm going in my program tangent right now.
But
we'll write...
You're welcome to do that, Rachel.
Okay. We write down collectively what words are used to describe us in our everyday life, like brother, bro, friend, and then what words we've heard describe us since we've been involved in the criminal legal system. And it's the most heartbreaking drawing of words, you know, monster, F up, criminal, felon, that kid, dropout, you know, terrible, terrible words. And we then ceremoniously rip that piece of paper up, of course, and you can just see the relief in just making that visible, that this is what we've inherited from the culture as a young person, and it's not true, and we can stop breathing that in and believing it to be true. And it's just a first step to externalize the very natural process of internalizing oppression. And then we write down the words that we want to be known for at Young New Yorkers, and it's the greatest list. It gets turned into a rap, and also it's very helpful for me because if the class is getting rambunctious, I'm just like, this is who we are, and I'm not accepting anything less. And I point to that list, and it's very grounding and it's deepening the understanding. So that's the first thing, is just being happy to see our city's young people and to offer a space where they're known for their greatness and can therefore in turn grow. And the second thing is, there always needs to be a chance to be heard by the systems that are meant to serve us and to advocate for change and to really center the wisdom of those people that have been most impacted by those systems, rather than theoretical papers or conjecture or research or data. All of that is, you know, powerfully undermined by the lived experience of the young people and other people who have been in the system that already know what to do. And it's really reminding us of like centuries old wisdom that we know about how to treat each other. Mm. Also, you know, just end mass incarceration completely. And other goals that are in reach.
Rachel, you skipped a little bit over that diagram about the curriculum, and I wanted to just delve back into that for a moment, because it occurred to me that you might have thoughts about how that curriculum development might feed then back in a loop into architectural teaching. And of course, that's something we're interested in, is like what would be the learnings you would see out of that curriculum development that you've done, you've pursued through Young New Yorkers, which might have resonance or might drive innovation in architectural teaching?
I love that question, especially since I did teach a research and design workshop with you all in December. And, you know, I wrote to all the students that we're going to follow a restorative curriculum, and we started each day, I think we had a 6-day intensive, and we started each day with a meditation and a check-in. And the check-in is, you know, an emotional check-in. Are you red, yellow, green? And you can elaborate if you want to, but it just puts into the space how you're doing. And I was planning, you know, you always have bias about what your audience is, to really push to the students about structural oppression and the impact it has on individual young lives, to make it very clear and foundational to the course. But the students had done the reading. Some of them had had relatives who were very young when they'd been arrested. And in that first check-in, several people wept because of the enormity of the responsibility of carrying this injustice into our design thinking and our design work. And then we completed, you know, we did rigorous critique and so on, but then we completed each day to just acknowledge what we'd learned from each other and then what we'd learned from the person sitting next to us. And it just creates a supportive environment where there's enough social capital and relational capital to then have those more rigorous critiques that allow us to grow. And I really thought that was wonderful, because if you bring a heart-centered focus to very tough issues, there's going to be an emotional impact on you as you think about them, explore them, and have a response to them in your design work, and being responsible for the limits that design and art always have on those issues. You know, architecture is, you know, an art form of space, but most of these traumatic events happen in time more than space. And so we just need to be mindful of those limits. And by creating that restorative structure to the work, we could have those hard conversations without being felt attacked or called out. Instead, it was just a wonderful opportunity to grow as an individual and as a collective, and to lean into a very difficult subject.
Mm. What's your consciousness about being a practitioner on the limits?
Mm.
Like, are you a practitioner at the limits of architecture or the limits of design?
I need to read more architecture magazines. I think the way,
yeah.
I think, yes, I am. I think if we would have a conversation about, am I a designer? Am I really an artist? You could have a debate that was no, and that would be equally as valid as the argument for yes. But what I really am self-conscious about, rather than being on the limits of practice of design, is the limits of my tools and my design thinking on the issue, and not becoming arrogant and visionary and applying those design visions onto a circumstance, but rather setting up structures for deep listening and contributions, and using design to amplify and reorganize deep wisdom held by people that aren't heard enough, and reorganize power dynamics so that conversations that can't normally happen in abundance and with joyful gratitude, so that they can be received.
We have another question about the presence of young New Yorkers in the city across Brooklyn and Manhattan. Do you have a headquarters where the presidents run from, and where is that in the city in relation to the many courthouses that these exhibitions that you've shown us today are held in?
We do have a HQ that we're not using because COVID. It's about 6 blocks from downtown where the courthouses are. And it's, what's important for us is that it's near a major train lines, so that lots of the kids from different peripheral neighborhoods of Brooklyn can get to us. And we have a lot of train lines right near us, so that's what's important. Yeah. We're working virtually at the moment. All programs happen virtually, so until the foreseeable future.
I hate to use the term, but 2020 has been unprecedented in so many respects. We're in a reasonably comfortable position here in Brisbane at the moment, and reasonably free, other than some limits on the number of people who can be be over for dinner, and some limits on dancing, which of course are putting the Bruce Architecture Ball into a different space this year. But the situation in America is obviously much more serious on a number of fronts. And I wonder if, in the context of COVID and the Black Lives Matters movement activities this year, how has that provided challenges and opportunities for what you're doing in your practice?
Well, personally, at first, there was a founder excitement to it because it was a problem that I needed to solve quickly with the team. And getting everything online and creating new virtual protocols that were empowering was a very creative process. But our young people are from neighbourhoods where most of the frontline people live. There's much higher rates of COVID, much higher deaths. Our young people had parents in hospital and the loss of loved ones. Many of my staff who lost loved ones as well. And so there was a tremendous amount of grief in the space. And, you know, at request of the graduates, we usually have a monthly dinner. We started having weekly graduate gatherings instead to just have something stable to hold on to as we were going through all this rapid change. And then we introduced a grief group on Fridays. The economic impact in New York City has been devastating as well. And it meant that the summer youth program that usually offers 70,000 internships to young people was cancelled. And I think it's not unrelated that gun violence this summer, it always goes up in the summer, but went up by 40%. And so people were experiencing shootouts outside their homes and really traumatic things that we would hope to never experience. And so we needed to hold space for that. And then the Black Lives Matter movement just sears so closely to the commitments of young New Yorkers, to the staff and to the experiences of the young people. And a lot of the kids are on the brink of having a criminal record. They were scared about protesting. And so we did a bunch of programs around how to protest as safely as possible, you know, what the risks are, what the realities are of the current policing of the protests. And we did receive some referrals from protest-related charges, and the team just created a beautiful history of protest curriculum and why it's important to be an advocate, and trying or standing in the commitment that we never make our young people bad people, that we always start with the greatness and then we go to the opportunity to grow.
It's been a tough
But it's been really hard in New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Rachel, it's been so great that you've been able to connect with us today. We've really enjoyed hearing from you and getting an update on your practice. This is the 10th and final of our alumni webinar series for this year. It's been a fantastic opportunity to connect with so many of our alum from across the world. Rachel, we're inspired by your bravery, and it's been fantastic to have you connected with the school over the recent summer in some teaching, but also through this series. So I want to really just thank you on behalf of the group today, but also part of the audience who will watch this into the future. So over the course of this year with these webinars, we've created this wonderful library of lectures, of Q&As with alum from the school over many years, generations, locations, and different journeys in architecture. And that's been a real highlight, I think, of this series, is to explore the diversity of a life in architecture. And that's really been wonderful in terms of creating this resource for future students to look at the ways in which their architectural careers might develop over the course of their lives. So Rach, thanks again. It's been great to connect with you, and we look forward to being in touch and following the next iterations of Young New Yorkers to see how the projects continue in the post-COVID world and how you progress. So thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you everyone.
Virtual exhibition on October 7. You should all come.
Sorry, say again.
We have a virtual exhibition at MoMA PS1 on October 7. You're all invited.
Send us a link and we'll send it around the school. That'd be great.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Cameron. I really appreciate your time and listening.
Excellent. Thanks, Rachel. And thank you everyone online. Thank you for the great questions. And we'll see you next year at the webinar series.